Hello, thank you for joining us in World Now. We start off in the United States of America, where reactions have continued to trail results from the presidential election. Former U.S. House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi, while speaking on the results, said Democrats may have fared better in Tuesday's election if President Joe Biden had exited the race sooner. We have details in this report.
The parable of January 6th reminds us that our democracy is only as strong as the courage and commitment of those.
Nancy Pelosi, one of the most powerful politicians in Washington, has shared her thoughts after watching the results from the U.S. presidential election. She argued, quote, "Had the president gotten out sooner, there may have been other candidates in the race," end quote. Her remarks are the latest finger-pointing from Democrats after the party lost hold of the White House and potentially both chambers of Congress on Tuesday. Nancy Pelosi is widely reported to have led the Democrats' push to oust President Joe Biden, who ended up leaving the race at the end of July after weeks of pressure following a poor debate performance against Donald Trump. Recall that as Joe Biden ended his campaign, he quickly endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris to take his place.
And it's been fascinating to watch Donald Trump because...
Still on reactions, an unnamed former Biden aide revealed that former President Barack Obama's advisors were to blame because they publicly encouraged Democratic infighting to push Joe Biden out and did not even want Kamala Harris as the nominee. Pennsylvania Senator John Fetterman, a Democrat, blamed the election loss on those who plotted to oust Joe Biden. New York Democratic Congressman Tom Suozzi said the election loss was partly due to the party's focus on being politically correct. In another development, Pentagon officials are holding informal discussions about how the Department of Defense would respond if Donald Trump issues orders to deploy active duty troops domestically and fire large swaths of apolitical staffers and defense officials. Reports say Mr. Trump has suggested he would be open to using active duty forces for domestic law enforcement and mass deportations, and has indicated he wants to stack the federal government with loyalists and clean out corrupt actors. Officials are now gaming out various scenarios as they prepare for an overhaul of the Pentagon.
Now have joining me on the news the president of the constituency for Africa, Melvin Food, and global affairs analyst Ejike Okpa. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me on the World Now. Well, I'm hoping you can hear me. So let's begin with you, Mr. Okpa. How do you react to Nancy's statement saying that if Biden had exited the race sooner than when he did, Kamala would have stood a chance against Trump?
That's medicine after death. I mean, the Democratic Party is a plantation party. It's a bunch of sheep and shepherds. They gather and they tell people what to do. Of course, yes, if Joe Biden had been truthful with Americans and allowed the process to take place, Kamala Harris would never have been the nominee. But then they did what they did. That's medicine after death. Trump is president, and we look forward to the next 4 years. If the Democrats are able to reorganize themselves and become realistic about the challenges of America, and maybe they will become a party of credibility. But as long as the Obamas, the Clintons, the Bidens keep becoming, the shepherd, telling a bunch of, sheep to end up sheepish, they're going to end up always complaining after the Republicans keep winning.
Mr. Foots, what was your reaction to seeing that Donald Trump, he is on his way to the White House for the second time? Did this come to you as a surprise?
Yeah, I think everybody's surprised. I was surprised, shocked, disappointed, all of that, as well as everybody else. But at the same time, I don't necessarily agree with my colleague America's a funny place. One has to know the history of this country to understand some of this stuff. One has to understand what happened to the American Indians. They became annihilated. What happened to the blacks who were captured and brought as slaves to America, my people? What has been their experience over 400 years? So this country is built on the backs of others, immigrants for the most part. So I was disappointed like everyone else, but at the same time, my mother always told me, don't agonize, organize. And so I think it's incumbent upon those of us who work on Africa. One, I'm going to do everything I can to make sure these Republicans do the best they can to help Africa. There is no guarantee whatsoever that there will be an Africa policy whatsoever. Trump did not have an Africa policy in his first term. He called the countries, quote unquote, shithole countries. So this is what we're looking at. So I think right now it's incumbent upon us African people, the diaspora, African immigrants, and all of us to rally ourselves together to try to impress upon this new administration to do good by Africa.
Assisting with you, Mr. Foot, before we talk about the impact of a Trump presidency on Africa, would you agree with those who have said possibly the media may have been used as a tool of disinformation or misinformation? Because looking at some of the polls that were seen right before the election, it will seem as though Kamala Harris was going to win.
Well, for sure, media plays a role. Media is a tool. And I guarantee you both sides played that tool. It was not just the Republicans who played the tool. The Democrats also played the tool. So those of us out here in the public, we have to decipher what is real, what is not real. It's not just the media. All kinds of games were played. I've been across Africa. I've been to 45 countries in Africa. I spent a lot of time in Nigeria. We talk about how bad African elections are. Trust me, this is no different. And so, on the one hand, sure the media played a role, but the media was being used, and it was being used by both sides, and that's typical in a political process. But not only the media, social media was also very much a tool, in this election. But that's the answer to your question.
Mr. Kwal, let's go to you. Donald Trump has named his campaign manager, Susan Wiles, as his chief of staff. What does this mean for activities in the White House? Who is Susan Wiles and how significant is she to the Trump campaign?
Look, the president, when it comes to naming a White House chief of staff, it's one of those appointments you don't have to get a Senate approval. So the president chose who he feels is going to, do the job, for him and with him. And so I don't have anything to say on that. Talking about, Mr. Foot, you're not an African. You have gone to an African country 45 times. Tell me what you have done for your neighborhood. Tell me an African-American neighborhood that has benefited, succeeded because of the array of Black people who have occupied political offices. All this complaining and crying about 400 years. What have you done in your lifetime? The most important thing is that we as Black people have to recognize the geography of our existence and mobilize to do something. How can you help Africa when you haven't helped yourself in America? What have you done? So all this thing about Democrats and Republicans, it doesn't really matter. When the election is over with, everybody rallies for the resources to attract it and bring it into their community. So let me tell you, in case you don't know, when Trump was president for the first term, he was the one that reauthorized the U.S. Exim Bank for a 7-year period. Obama killed that. Obama wanted to kill the bank. Okay, and now he increased the lending capacity of U.S. Exim Bank from $135 billion to $175 billion. And he was the one that said America shouldn't just be exporting to Africa. They want to buy from Africa. So don't get this emotional sentiment about slavery and colonization. What have you done in your zip code? You come to Dallas, Texas, where I live. I am putting together the first 25-story building on MLK built by Black people in this country. So all this idea of giving excuses, complaining white people are not white people, We have had an Obama. Obama, when Obama was president, did he appoint a black person, chief of staff to the White House, or even press secretary? He didn't do it. He didn't do it. He had people surrounded around him, and then all he wanted Africa to do was talk about gay. Okay, so please, sir, have none of you have seen you before. You are not an African. I can take you on any issue, political, economic policies, and you will not do very well. Because you know what? Tell me the neighborhood you live in America. So let's just look at how can we work with anybody who's president of America, and not just wait when they are Democrats or Republicans. The white people have equal number of blacks, equal number of whites as Democrats and Republicans. So it doesn't matter who's in the White House. They're going to get something. We are the only one that put all our eggs in one basket. Then that's why we end up losing. Obama, what did Obama do for 8 years? Did he help Kenya? He's a Kenyan American. He's not an African American. I'm a Nigerian American.
All right, Mr. Okwa, very quickly, let's allow Mr. Melvin Foot to react to what you have said. Mr. Melvin Foot, you can go ahead.
Well, I do believe that opinions are just like noses. Everybody got one, and that's great. Sure, I would love to debate you on a lot of this stuff. The reality is the reality. And the history of African Americans and the histories of Africans are intertwined. I can look at you and say, oh, you're Nigerian. Show me how you have built Africa up to the power that it should be. So that Mazungo is not just stealing your oil, your gas, your minerals, etc. There's a lot of thought among all of us. Until we unite, to me, we go nowhere. You want to blame Obama for what? Come on. I think it's ridiculous what you're saying, quite frankly. And, you're entitled to your position, and I respect that. But if you ask me, you're absolutely out of line. But this is what we're up against as African people. We can't even have a civil conversation. I'm not African. What the hell am I?
You're not African. You're not. You're not.
Are you
a black
African?
man in America.
Gentlemen, please, can we observe decorum? Please, let's face the conversation. We are still staying on the outcome of this election and what it will mean for other nations especially. Mr. Foot, can you respond to, Putin congratulating Trump, saying he is ready for talks? There are concerns about how this will mean for a lot of other countries' security in that sense. So looking at the Middle East, looking at Africa, looking at Russia itself, what does it mean for the landscape of war in the world?
I think it's going to be traumatic, and it probably was going to be traumatic either way, one way or another. Sure, Putin thinks that Trump is now going to do his bidding and going to stop funding the war in Ukraine. All of these things, some of that might be true, some of it might be true. I think the change of leadership in America is absolutely something that is going to affect the whole world. Another issue that I'm concerned about, he's saying that he doesn't believe in climate change. He doesn't believe that he don't want to fund research to try to find ways of preventing climate change. Well, who's taking the brunt of that discussion? It's Africa. It's people of the southern part of the world that's actually seeing flooding. Nigeria, one of the countries having tremendous problem with flooding. So do we want to ignore it? And Trump's response is drill, baby, drill. He planned to expand U.S. drilling for fossil fuels, for oil and gas. I think it's going to be not only bad for the United States, it's going to be bad for the world. Sure, the billionaires would get a lot of money off of it. Sure of that. But I think we as civil society, as humans, are going to pay a tremendous price for that. Now, a lot of times the campaign is one thing. You make these arguments to get elected. But once you get elected, the reality hits home. And despite the fact that Mr. Trump is going to have a majority in Congress, they're going to have this, he already has the Supreme Court. I see already that he's backing up on some of this. The appointment of this. Go ahead.
All right, Ejike, please react to what a Trump presidency will mean for the landscape of war across the world.
Well, I'm not clairvoyant. I don't know what's going to happen until he's sworn in, and then he starts to govern. So this is still a campaign period. He's going to say what he's going to say. So I don't know, what he's going to do. I don't know what Netanyahu is going to do. I don't know what Africa is going to do. America don't owe Africa anything. If Africans can get their acts together, that's their business. So my point is, I don't believe in climate change. There's a climate condition. New Orleans, that we had Katrina the number of years ago. We had it. So there's flooding everywhere. So what we have to do is, how do we manage the resources we have in order to have, the sort of quality of life that we can afford ourselves. You go to the Bible time, there have been flooding. So, when Democrats come, just like our God came in and sold us this crap about, climate change and, we're going to save the earth. What are we saving the earth for? I mean, all of us are going to be buried in the earth. Is going to swallow us. The earth has a way of correcting itself, but we can manage certain things that are within our power. And that's got to come from policy. And that policy doesn't have to be international. Every country owes themselves the responsibility to do the things to make their people live well where they are. If they want to go somewhere else, let them go. But as African leaders have to start focusing on Africa and not look to America or China or UK or anybody to come and rescue them. Who are the ones taking the money out of Africa? All the African heads of states that have, mansions in Europe, nobody's holding gun to them. Nobody's holding gun to the head and said, do it. So, blaming America for what Africa is doing is just a lousy excuse.
Well, the real guess is about what a Democrat will be as a president, and that's what we're seeing with Joe Biden. But America has decided, and world leaders have begun congratulating, hoping for a beneficial relationship. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me on The World Now. Presidency of the Constituency for Africa, Melvin Foods and Global Affairs Analyst Ejike Opa. Thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you for having me.
We're still on to The World Now. We'll be back with more stories after this break. Stay with us.